Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the table. Super excited today. Have a really special guest on. This is Tim. Tim, what's your last name? Is it Whitaker, right? Or
Yeah, like Adventures in Odyssey, Wits End.
you watched that too? Okay, so I didn't. Yeah, we'll get into that in a little bit. But
Come on, bro. Come on. Come
yes,
on. Of course
Adventures
I
in
did.
Odyssey. My kids kind of watch it now. It's appropriate. It's nice. We have Tim on. He leads the New Evangelicals, huge on Instagram. They're growing on YouTube. I felt a couple months ago, I started finding his stuff, and I just felt, just being honest with you, I felt the Lord ask me to bring him on because I felt like he had something to share. You've been following me for a while. You know, we deal with Christians who are struggling in their faith, and we also want to talk to atheists or agnostics who are curious. And so often people demonize those people, and no one's actually talking directly to them. And so I felt like Tim was supposed to come on and share from the heart kind of tips and tricks or some advice on how to deconstruct in a healthy way, how to deal with skepticism and doubt in a healthy way. And so I'm super excited to have you on, bro. And I want to say this at the beginning. If you're familiar with him, if you're not familiar with him, with Tim, me and Tim have certainly some different views on some certain things. And I'm just going to let you know I'm okay with that. I feel like we agree on the core essentials of the faith, that Jesus is the Son of God. He died, he rose from the dead, and through him, we can have life with the Father eternally. We believe in that. The secondary, tertiary stuff, I'm going to allow to kind of fall by the wayside for the sake of having a conversation around truth. And we can argue about those things later. I don't do that today. I want to sit with brothers, and me and Tim, and talk to the people who are actually going through this. Because when I went through it, I felt like I had nobody. And I certainly never found a video like this one where people were speaking directly to me and how to deal with it in a healthy way. So, Tim, thank you so much for coming on, bro. I would love for you to maybe just kind of open us up, tell us about your background briefly and your experience with deconstruction, and then we can get into kind of some of the advice that we would have for somebody going through that. So I'll kick it over to you, bro.
Thanks for having me. I really
Yeah,
thought
man.
for a second you were going to say, hey, can you open us up in prayer? And I was like, dude, I don't know. It's been a long time. So.
Would you mind? No, I'm just playing.
I
I'm gonna
was
have you.
prepared for that question.
I'll have you do it at the end.
All right, cool. Yeah, thanks again for having me. Yeah, my name is Tim. I'm the creator and founder of the New Evangelicals. My story is pretty typical for folks who end up, we can use deconstruction as a term and we can get into that. I call
Sure.
it renegotiating faith. These are tomato.
I like that.
I grew up homeschooled, deeply embedded in very conservative, like American Reformed theologies. I think John MacArthur, think tulip Calvinism, that kind of world. I was invested very early in my church. I was 8 years old, wearing a little suit and tie, handing out bulletins in my church. And my church at the time was, they did not believe in modern worship music. It was a hymns only church. So
Wow.
a piano and some hymns. And then, we got a new radical pastor who was like, hey, maybe we can sing some modern praise and worship choruses, like shout to the Lord, some real bangers. And my dad, who got saved when he was 18 and kind of converted from the rocker lifestyle to this more fundamentalism, was like, well, I play guitar. And they were thinking, how do we get drums here? And
Right.
because they didn't want to lose half the church over
Right.
drums. So my dad goes, well, how about my 11-year-old son, which is me? How about we just throw him on the drums and have him learn? I mean, who's going to get mad at the 11-year-old kid playing drums?
Right.
So that kind of got my career in music started. I became a very proficient and professional player over time. But yeah, I mean, always committed to Jesus, always never rebelled, never was the bad kid, firstborn, super hesitant and fear-based, type 6
Yeah.
Enneagram. I wanted to do right and I wanted to love God well, owned my faith very early on, said all the prayers and meant them. I did all the things
Right.
that would prove to anyone that I'm a committed Jesus follower, not just in word, but also in action.
Right.
And then long story short, and there's more to the story, but essentially when 2016 came around, that was a moment where I could no longer ignore some of the things that in my faith tradition I was always kind of questioning, but I could tolerate. Why are we always waging war on Starbucks during Christmas time? Okay, that's annoying, but I can get over that. But 2016 was a moment where I said, something is really rotten, something really stinks in this place that I'm in. How come the Sunday school teachers who insisted that I, as a human, had to live up to God's sexual standard, which was don't touch yourself or anyone else until you're married, right? That's pretty much what they tell you.
Right.
And if you don't, you're maybe under God's judgment, or you can't serve in the church, or God won't use you. So I did that. I did wait till I was married, like I was told. And now you're mad at me because I find the guy on the cover of Playboy magazine, the guy who's bragging about grabbing women by the you-know-what,
Right.
like suddenly, because I can't support that, I'm the oddball here? Like,
Come on, bro.
I don't know, bro. Like, that sounds a little sus to me, right? And so, I'm not sure about you, but in my evangelical tradition, something that was ingrained in me was this idea of, Tim, when the world tells you to move, you plant your feet firmly and say, no, you move. This idea of like having integrity and standing on character and principle and truth.
Right.
Well, I felt like in that moment, my evangelical tradition moved. And I said, I'm not moving. I'm not going to move.
Interesting.
Now, obviously, I moved over time in a different direction between COVID and Black Lives Matter and just other realizations I was having. But that kind of got me to a point where in the end of 2020 in December was when I said, I think we need a new evangelical movement. And I started the Instagram account, Scared to Death. I thought it was such an audacious name. I'm like, this is really, this could be a complete flop. My friends can laugh at me after this. And it ended up growing very quickly on Instagram. And then the following year, we became a nonprofit. And now I do this full time and I play music on the weekends.
What do you do? Where do you play music? At church or
I play
no?
in a cover band. No, I got kicked out of my church when I started this work. So I play in a top 40 cover band. It's called the Tri-State area: New Jersey, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Delaware. It's a really robust cover scene. So I'm signed to like a management label, and they send me on gigs to play every weekend. It's great.
That's another thing too. That like I when I first found you, we just talked about this offline. We were watching Ruslan. You said you grew up playing music in the church. Same for me. Like my mom drugged me to guitar lessons at 11. And as soon as I learned, I was on the youth band. I mean, I still play now. And so I play bass and guitar and stuff like that and sing and whatever. So
I'm using my in-ears to monitor myself for this conversation. Like I'm all about that.
That's awesome, dude. That's awesome. So, and my brother is a drummer. So like I grew up, drummers are actually the worst people to grow up with. And I can say that, I'll say that to your face because I grew up with him. And when he's learning, he sucked in the beginning. And
no doubt,
I'm sure he'll be
bro.
watching this. And we joke about this all the time because my parents did not get him an electric kit. They got him an acoustic one. And so for years, we all had to endure those first fruits of the drumming. And it was so
My
bad.
parents were saints looking back. I mean, I was down there a lot. You know what they say? What's the difference between a high school marching band and shoes in the dryer?
I don't know.
Nothing.
That's right.
There's nothing different.
That's incredible.
Totally get it.
When you were going through, 2020 was a pivotal year for a lot of people. I know it was pivotal for me. Like, if we can just be really fully transparent, like I grew up in the South, and sometimes you don't realize you have biases or whatever, unhelpful ways of thinking until you realize you do, and until you get something gets brought to your face. And George Floyd happens, and I begin to realize that I had some biases, and it was really unhelpful, but it was a beautiful moment of repentance for me. And like my wife and I dialogued a lot that summer. And I just realized that I had some things in my heart. They weren't Christ-like. They weren't helpful. And so 2020 was an interesting year. Did you have a moment in your deconstruction journey where you doubted the existence of God, or have you gone through that? I know that's my story. Like I went through a real season of skepticism and doubt. It was after I watched the Rhett and Link video where they kind of came out, and I was like, I started to feel it crumble, but it was crazy. So did you have that experience?
Not really. When I was 28, I went through a really intense, I'm going to use the evangelical language of season.
Go for it.
Of
Praise the Lord.
Just intense anxiety and depression and panic that hit me out of nowhere, like a light switch. I mean, one day I had a panic attack watching the remake of Jumanji, the first one. That was how it all. I don't even know why. I'm in the theater.
I know why.
I'm gonna die.
It's that bad.
I'm going to die.
Yeah.
No, that's a great movie. But I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm gonna die. I just had that. I never had language for this.
Wow.
And so that just kind of set me on this really and this was before I quote unquote deconstructed, although this might have played a role in some of the theology that I had to renegotiate. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I went through a really intense, it was several years. I lost like 30 pounds in the first couple months. I wasn't eating. I was just panicky. I didn't know where it was coming from. I had no language about anxiety or how to manage that. Never went to therapy. So that whole like 3-year spurt was really life changing for me. It grew my empathy a lot. And
It's
I
awesome.
think in the middle of that, I might have had like, well, let me try that I can't believe in God thing for a week. But you know, here's what I say to people. I understand. I watch the atheist versus Christianity debates.
Sure.
I think that there are valid concerns and questions about the existence of God. I mean, I totally
Mm-hmm.
understand that. I
Yeah.
find the existence of God a more compelling perspective
Yeah.
than my atheist friends, but I also understand their arguments, and they have good arguments. I mean, the
Yeah.
silence of God's a big deal. Suffering's a big question that I
Yeah.
don't think my tradition gave me adequate answers to, frankly. So
Yes.
I don't want to downplay like, oh, well, atheists just there. Yeah, they say in their heart there is no God, even though there is one. I think that when we really get into it, there are good arguments to make. Watch some Christopher Hitchens stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
that guy
Yep.
will rock how you view, forget Christianity, just God in general,
Yeah.
very quickly, and bring up I think very valid concerns. For me, it was more about what do I believe about God than it was about believing in God. So it was more about a crisis of theology than it was a crisis of faith. And I think
Interesting.
for most people who deconstruct, now I don't have empirical data on this, okay? So this is just my hunch, and of course I'm shaped by
Right.
my experience, by who I hear from, etc. I
Right.
think while some people deconstruct and go to atheism, there's a few accounts that I follow who have done that.
Mm-hmm.
And for me at this point, it's not a moral or amoral thing. It just is what it is. I think a lot of people who deconstruct still want to be somewhere in the world of spirituality and
Yeah.
faith and religion. And that does bear out in data, because even the rise
Yeah.
of the nuns, over
Mm.
half of those people who identify as nun religiously still are very much into some form of spirituality, or
Right.
think about, some kind of divine essence that is beneath all of this. So
Right.
that's kind of how I see it now.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah. So we deal with we try to speak to those people, and I get messages constantly. Every time I put a video out, I'll get so many messages or comments or whatever of individuals who are saying, "Man, like I remember when I did my video hour-long kind of testimony of what happened, my experience with doubt, skepticism, and then eventually going into deconstruction." Um, and like I said, deconstruction I think is a helpful term. Renegotiation of the faith. I think that's great language. But the doubt and skepticism, that place of like where I was very comfortable and now I'm not, and I didn't really choose this. It's happening to me. I get people messaging me all the time, like, I'm so scared. I'm nervous. I don't want to be going through this. And I remember this one guy messaging me. He says, I pray that what you're saying is true because I want to believe it. And I just feel like the best way I can describe it, that season of doubt, you saw the movie Get Out, right? By like Jordan Peele.
Yeah.
Yeah. When they're in that like headspace and you can't
Mm-hmm.
get out, that's what it feels like. I mean, it feels like I don't know how I got in this pit. Or maybe you feel like Shadow from Homeward Bound, and you just can't get out. And
That's a
so,
throwback.
for the kids out there, all right,
Yeah. Or the adults, really.
yeah, that's true. The kids at heart. I would love to. Today, I want to speak to those people. And I told Tim off air that oftentimes I think the conversation in the ethos right now, and it's a good conversation that needs to happen, is like angry mom, angry dad yelling at each other, saying deconstruction's good, no, deconstruction's bad, or whatever. We need to wrestle with our doubt. No, you just need to shut up and listen to your pastor. And then meanwhile, like there's a little kid sitting down there, and they're the actually ones going through it, and no one's really speaking to them. And I think Tim and his team over there do a great job. And so I actually want to take some time not to even argue whether deconstruction, the renegotiation of your faith, whatever, an open view of certain things is healthy. I think we're here now. I think that conversation is gone. I think we are here now. Now we need to take almost like a pastoral heart on how can people be equipped to go forward in health. And so I
Hmm.
want to go back and forth with just some piece of advice that I've learned either going through skepticism, doubt, or my deconstruction, the renegotiation, and then I would love for you to kind of go too, and so we can bounce back and forth off of each other's points. But do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first with piece of advice?
Why don't you kick us off? I'll follow
All right,
your lead.
I'll go first. Yeah. So the first one, I just wrote some quick notes down. Was don't be afraid. I know this was huge for me. I was terrified when I was going through this. Now, of course, mine was more centered on like doubt and skepticism of like if it was true. But I've talked to many people who are, like Tim said, he's like, I feel like they're asking me to move and I can't move. And that can be a really scary thing because this is, I mean, for me and Tim, we grew up in church, and many of you watching, you grew up in this. This is your whole life. And your
Mm,
identity is found in this. And there's a lot of fear. Anytime change comes, it's scary. I want to say this, don't be afraid. This is a natural part of a robust spiritual life. I would argue that any person, man, woman, or child, who does not wrestle, I mean, the scripture even tells us to wrestle with our faith. They don't wrestle with your faith in a real way. You probably don't have a robust faith. Um, and like, what's the cliche, the youth pastor thing? I was a youth pastor for a long time. It's not your mom's faith, not your dad's faith. We say that. And then when the kid actually begins to, they want to take their faith in their own hands, like you did, like I did. Well, now the youth pastor gets angry. Like, no, well, I really meant you need to follow exactly what I say. But like, no, you told me to take ownership of my faith. I'm doing that, and this, and this doesn't line up. And so, the first thing I would just say is don't be afraid. This is actually a really part of a healthy spiritual life. Do you have anything you want to add to that, bro?
Yeah, I would say I think that's really important. I think it's okay to admit that you're fearful.
For sure.
Deconstruction for some people can kind of feel like you jumped off the ledge, you can't see the bottom. You're not
Yeah.
sure if there's a soft pillow there or if there's hard cement, right? You just
Yeah.
don't know where you're going to end up. And that's why it's so scary, because for the first time, you're really questioning maybe some core concepts or ideas that shaped you as an adult. So, the skyscraper of what makes you is shaking for the first time.
Yeah.
And you're asking the big questions, but it's not even just the questions, right? It's that
Right.
you're entertaining different answers.
Mm.
Is hell forever? Well, maybe it is, but what if it's not? Am I allowed to even think that?
Yeah.
Are queer people really just going to hell because they're queer? Am I allowed to even ask that question? Maybe I'm not convinced of like what I've been taught. So what makes deconstruction scary for people is that they're asking questions and entertaining new ideas or possibilities that might kick them out beyond the boundary of their current faith paradigm.
Yes.
Right. So that's important to recognize. And I understand that. I mean, listen, you're talking to someone who very similar to you, Tyler. I've been through the thick of deconstruction, and I will tell the audience, one thing I don't like doing ever to people is I don't like to lie, and I don't like to make things sound either more optimistic or pessimistic than they are. I try to do my best to be based in as far as data goes. Deconstruction can cost you. There's a cost to that process sometimes.
That's right.
And you have to weigh out if that cost is worth it or not. Some people say, you know what, I'd rather be safe inside my current church community and just put those things deep down somewhere and not even ask the questions. Yeah. And I know friends like that who I love and respect who are still in those spaces. I get it. I was not wired that way. Frankly, my faith tradition radicalized me to be not that way, right? Follow the truth wherever it takes you. Stand on principle. Yeah. Don't let me dictate your faith. So I took those people seriously. And then I found their boundaries, and then I was kicked out. That's a very real scenario. And that's why deconstruction is so lonely and painful. Yeah. But I will say that on the other side of especially the worst part, the most intense part of deconstruction is a much more liberative way of thinking about faith in the world and humanity that truly, in my opinion, brings a whole new set of freedom in Christ. It's a whole new way of thinking about that term. That maybe you thought, well, it seems kind of legalistic because they say faith, freedom in Christ, but there's all these rules. But deconstruction can actually bring, I would argue, true freedom in Christ in that sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, because here's the thing, and I want to ask you a question after I say this, but the ultimate goal is to find what's true. And I mean, I'm inclined to believe that Jesus is truth personified. And so, I have felt this freedom to read anything, to listen to anybody. We were talking, I don't know if we were talking online or online, I can't remember, but to go to any type of Catholic mass or Anglican service or Greek Orthodox, anybody, or have a conversation with any type of pastor, because ultimately I want Christ to lead me into all truth. Now, I think, definitely part of the conversation is there's truth. That means there's non-truth. There's things that aren't true. But I'm willing to wrestle that. And I think the gem or the gold that you find on the other side of that wrestle is better than, like you said, the comfort that you might find in just like putting your hands over your ears, putting your head in the sand, and like, I'm not going to look at that.
Hmm.
I have found it so much more enriching to like, this is going to be hard. This is going to suck. This is going to be scary. And it may cost me. I mean, bro, like, I come from a charismatic tradition. Pre-trib rapture is like in the gospels, like that's,
Totally.
and I
Totally.
remember when we started, my brother-in-law and I, we lead the church that we pastor at, when we started to share some of our family, that we had a different view. Like, I think we're definitely going to go through the tribulation. Like, I mean, it's pre-trib rapture only for Americans, poor people in Iran and India who've been being persecuted the whole time. Like this, like I guess they
Right.
missed out on the whole
Right.
pre-trib rapture.
Right.
Sucks for them.
Right.
Um, one of our family members like completely stopped talking to us, and I haven't
Yeah.
talked to her over that. And
Yeah.
so it may cost you, but the goal is to find Christ. So yeah, I had a question, but I completely forgot it. Do you have anything to add?
One thing that might scare some people listening to this, but I'm going to say it, is that
Go for it.
you might find that applying modernist Enlightenment versions of truth to the Bible leaves you wanting. We
Mm,
have to acknowledge this. Like,
interesting.
I understand the evangelical apologetics world, but when you start listening to serious scholars who actually know like
Yes.
the deep level of the history and what we know, what we don't know. I mean, one great book, a great intro just to the Bible. It's well received by most people. Is right here, A History of the Bible, the book and its faith by John Barton. He's one of the most foremost biblical scholars, committed Christian, Anglican priest. I mean, this guy is
Come
Christian all
on.
the way. And the book just goes through what we do know and what
Yeah.
we don't know about how
Yeah.
we got our modern Bibles and
Yeah.
the various complexities that go into assembling what we
Yes.
have today. And I'll tell people it is much more complicated than God said it, that settles it, or the Bible is quote unquote God's word. I'm sorry. If you want to take your faith seriously, if you look for truth in that sense, you might come away with some uncomfortable realities.
Yeah.
Now I'm not, what I'm not saying is this. I'm not saying you have to see it my way in order to be a Christian. If you want to
Right.
hold a biblical inerrancy because that brings you security and faith, then do that. Right. My
Right.
concern is when those people say, well, if you don't hold a biblical inerrancy, you're not a true Christian. It's like, bro, like, do you even know anything beyond the sliver of your own Christian paradigm? And
Yeah.
so, again, like I'm all about seeking and trying to know. I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah.
But you might be surprised at what you find. So just don't lose your mind
1000%.
when you realize that, oh, the ending of Mark was added like centuries later.
Right.
Okay, well,
Right.
that could be that changes. Like, did
And all
Jesus really
scholars
say
agree on
that?
that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, this is just like what it is, right? So did Jesus
Yeah.
say that part in red? Well, we don't really know. But it's okay to have some uncertainty in your faith,
Yeah.
because part of theology is more art than it is science. And when
Yeah.
you apply the scientific method to theology, you get really disastrous, in my opinion,
Yeah.
results. And you start defending things that don't need to be defended. And you
Yeah.
end up trying to play the game of science with the religious textbook that is trying to answer very different questions and telling you very different stories and different types of truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
It would be like, I mean, some of your audience might see this as like sacrilegious, but I'm going to go for it anyway. So
Go
forgive
for
me
it.
if you see it that way. It
Go
would be
for it.
like trying to apply the scientific method to Lord of the Rings.
Don't.
Well,
How dare you?
how did Gotham really exist? Because, science and like, how does this one ring have all this power? That's not the truth that Lord of the Rings is after.
Right.
Lord of the Rings is so many ways very true. The story of humans and power, and tells it in beautiful mythological ways.
Mm-hmm.
That's in many cases what the Bible is doing with how it tells history and story. And there's deep wisdom and deep truths about people experiencing God that we should learn from in both positive and negative ways. But to apply the scientific method on the Bible, you're going to be sorely disappointed, in my estimation.
Are you prophetic? Do you have the gift of prophecy?
I
Because
don't know, man.
No, just
Do
messing
I?
with you.
You're the charismatic here, you know. I don't know.
That's why I'm asking. That's why because I have a Gandalf tattoo right here,
Oh my God.
and right here I'm Lord of the, I got this whole shelf right here is Lord of the Rings stuff. So that's crazy.
Well, then you get it.
I get it. Yeah. So I didn't mean to laugh while you were talking earlier, but
No, you're good. You're good.
I was thinking about the once again picking on my own tradition. Well, I don't necessarily claim these types of people, but the charismatic snake handlers.
Oh yeah.
And it's like
Yeah.
somebody leans into him, and as the guy is in the ambulance getting bit, it's like, hey, we just learned that the end of Mark is probably not really. Sorry, you should never have picked up that
Right.
snake.
Right.
That would have sucked.
Definitely an extreme example, but it's a true one. I mean, that for
Yeah.
some people that is a reality, right?
Yeah.
And so you can see the kind of danger that you can get yourself into.
We need to. This is so interesting. Like, I was just having a conversation with my house church last night. They were over, and there's a gentleman who loves Ken Ham, and I respect Ken Ham. I think he's trying to do his best for the kingdom of God with what he has in his mind. That's fine. I want to give charity where I can give it. But where Ken Ham doesn't give charity is for people like William Lane Craig, and others who they say, if you don't believe in a 6-day creation narrative, then you don't believe in sola scriptura. I mean, and like
Completely.
that type of rhetoric is just completely unhelpful. And it I don't know, that sort of thing really just bugs me because it elevates your interpretation of the truth over the actual scriptures themselves. And because, like you're saying, like we no one, I don't think, has the corner on truth, and that's why we need to be able to hear from everybody. And one of the things that, like, I actually respect about a lot of people who are deconstructing, contrary to what many pastors who are, speakers might think, is that many people who are deconstructing don't struggle with pride. They don't have pride. It's like I'm holding everything really loosely, and I'm gonna open my hands and, like, I don't know. So people ask me, like, what do you believe about your eschatology? I don't know. I know it's probably not pre-trib. What do you believe about the creation of the world? I don't know. I haven't planted my flag somewhere, and I don't know. A view like that, where we don't use incendiary language and we just come with humility, it's so much more helpful. I mean, I was reading this morning in this room, I was reading my Bible, reading through Judges, and I get to this part, this crazy, crazy freaking story where a Levite takes a concubine, goes to the city. The men want to have sex with the Levite and his, caretaker or whatever. They don't do it. And instead, he's like, don't take me, but take my concubine. The Bible says they abuse her all night long, so she dies. It's this wild story. And then afterwards, the Bible says the Levite takes and cuts her up into 12 pieces and sends her out to the tribes of Israel. And the Bible's painting that in, like, a good light. Like, yes, he sent her out, and Israel's going to come, and they're gonna repay them for wickedness. But I'm like, you had to cut her up? Would not a letter have sufficed? And the point is, that stupid story is, the Bible's complicated, and it's hard to understand. And I
Yeah.
wish people would approach it with more humility. So that's all I'm going to say on that. Yeah,
Well, this is the man, I don't know your audience fully, so I'm not sure where they're all at, but maybe to give some language to this.
Sure.
This, in my estimation, is the problem of fundamentalism. Now, I
For
want to
sure.
be very clear. Fundamentalism is not just a Christian problem. Fundamentalism exists anywhere. I've met fundamentalist atheists. I've met fundamentalist people of other religions. We know that. So this is not me saying only Christianity has this problem, but
Right.
evangelical fundamentalism is what shaped so much of my theology.
Yeah.
Okay, and so how much of how I see the world.
Yeah.
And the problem with
That's good.
fundamentalism is that it's more concerned with protecting its own dogmas than it is really being honest about the text it's examining. I mean, and by the way, just so your audience knows, I'm not exaggerating when I say this, because I have this book right here. It's called 5 Views on Biblical Inerrancy. It's a great read. I recommend it for anyone. Cool. It's Robert Mueller, Pete Enns, Michael Bird, Kevin Van Hooser, and John Frank. 4 of these people hold to inerrancy in some different type of way, and Pete Enns does not. It's a great read. I recommend it. Al Mohler is the president of a big Southern Baptist Convention college. He's a huge fundamentalist, one of the most influential names in evangelicalism. He says that it doesn't matter what science or archaeological evidence shows about the historical biblical accounts in the Hebrew Bible. He will always believe what the Bible says literally over those accounts.
Right.
That is not intellectual. That is not
Right.
truth seeking. That is
Right.
protecting your dogma over
Right.
the data, right?
Yeah.
You have a narrative that the Bible's inerrant, meaning, and I want to be very clear because there are some different views on this, but
Sure.
according to the Chicago Statement of Biblical Inerrancy, which
Right.
is what most evangelicals in America would hold to in some way, shape, or form, the Bible is true in all matters of morality, science, and history that it teaches. So, for example, when you read about the Joshua story in the Battle of Jericho, right? What they say is, well, that's a literal story that happened just as it's described. Now, archaeologically speaking,
Yeah.
many scholars say, no, the evidence doesn't really support this story the same way.
Right.
Someone like Al Mohler would say it doesn't matter. The Bible is
Right.
true and not the data. I'm just giving that so the audience understands
Yeah.
what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So when you have that view of the scripture, you actually do not take the scripture seriously. You're actually constricting the scripture to fit into a worldview that you've predetermined it must fit into. So I
good.
argue that people who hold a biblical inerrancy in that sense, and fundamentalists, even though they use language, we stand on the truth of God's word, we take the Bible seriously, they actually don't, because they can't handle a text that would not fit into their modernist assumptions. So to your point about Ken Ham is convinced that Genesis 1 and 2, which, by the way, are different creation stories that do not align. I'm very clear about that. That they paint a 6-day literal creation story, and anyone who does not hold to that view, he said, does not believe the gospel. Now, that is bat crap. I'm not sure if I can curse in your podcast. That's bat crap crazy. Okay? And people like that, I have no weight in my life. I do not take them seriously. And so those are the problems that I think a lot of people, like myself, maybe you, run into once we do the thing that they told us to do. Don't believe me, study the scriptures for yourself. Well, I'm listening to other voices. They make much more compelling arguments on the text. I don't believe you anymore. Oh, you're a heretic. That's how the cycle works.
Right. Yeah, it's so good. I mean, we're 31 minutes in. We're on the first point, but this is
here. You know,
this is good. I appreciate it, bro. And like, I think we're getting to the point of like, this is the conversation, and then the person who's deconstructing is like in the middle of it, and they hear Ken Ham on one side and they hear whoever else on the other side, and they don't know where to go. And I want to just encourage that person. Like, don't freak out. Follow your gut. Like, I have a conviction that if you I want to make sure I actually agree with what I'm about to say. If you are honest with yourself, if you're honest with yourself, and you're like, I'm not trying to read maybe my own desires into the text or with the evidence. I just want to know the truth. What does the truth say? Then I believe the Spirit will lead you into all truth. And so you can't be afraid of where it's going to take you. Did you have one, or I have another one we can kind of bounce off of?
I'm following your lead here.
Come on, let's go. All right, so the next one, we've already kind of touched on it, but we can maybe dive into it a bit more, is to read a lot of different people. Now, Tim has this saying that I didn't understand. I never thought about it this way, but when I heard him say it, it was like, oh, that's really helpful. And if I say it the wrong way, please, correct me. It's like, you're in the attic, and you find out the attic is not habitable to live any longer. And so many people sometimes jump out the window and commit spiritual suicide. And I would hate for that to happen to somebody. And I guess I understand if that's where you feel like that's your only option. And also in this realm of deconstruction or skepticism, there's also a lot of emotional pain, trauma. Sometimes it's not just an intellectual pursuit. There's things pushing you towards that, and I understand that. But what I appreciate about Tim and the New Evangelicals is it may be uncomfortable for modern day evangelicalism, but they are at least opening the door and revealing, hey, there's a lot more rooms here. There's a lot more. Christianity is a humongous house. Like, I grew up in it's so interesting. We kind of grew up on the opposite sides of the tracks. You were Calvinists, Reformed, John MacArthur, and I was the people that y'all thought were demonic.
You were the charismaniacs.
We were the enemy. We were strange fire.
Totally, bro. Unbiblical. Did not read your Bible, clearly.
And here we are uniting around deconstruction. Look at this all these years later.
Look at God.
Yeah, won't he do it? So what was I saying? Yeah, so yeah, Tim and you guys are opening the doors up to all these different rooms. When I started branching out of my very narrow, because it's interesting how these two branches almost like hate each other, but they're actually really similar.
Totally.
They're very narrow. A lot of fear of like, don't look anywhere else, and like very hard. And a lot of mainline denominations I found are actually not that way. So anyways, I really appreciated you guys that there are so many different rooms. So the point is, read a lot of different people, watch a lot of different videos. Like you just listed what 2 or 3 different books in the first 30 minutes of this podcast is incredible. Read a bunch of different stuff. One of the things you may be struggling with is not the text, but your expressions, maybe failed interpretation of that text or whatever. And so don't give up. I'll toss it to you here. I heard somebody say every stream thinks they're a river until they go to a different stream, and they think there's the biggest one. And then you look and like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of Anglicans, there's a lot of Methodists, there's a lot whoever. So yeah, I mean, that was huge for me. And I mean, I've listed people on this podcast. I think Remnant Radio is great. I mean, they're charismatic, but they have really introduced me to a lot of different people that I would not have been privy to. So I mean, there's a ton of different people on Matt Whitman on the 10-minute Bible Hour. He goes and interviews a ton of different people. I think he's great. It just kind of opens your palate to a bunch of different expressions of Christianity. Yeah, I'll toss it to you, bro.
Yeah, well, you're close to my analogy. We call it the basement, not the attic. But it's same idea though, right? It's I'll use myself so I don't feel like I'm disparaging other people. But I grew up in a place that was like, this is what Christianity is.
Sure.
Here it is. This is the whole thing, whole kit and caboodle. And there's nothing beyond, to quote Moana, my children's favorite movie right now, nothing beyond the reef. This is all there is. Right. And so I was in that basement for most of my life, just doing the thing. And yeah, there were whiffs of stink and things were kind of moldy and okay, some bad leaders, but this is Christianity. Yeah. And it wasn't until I got above ground where I thought, or I was taught, that there was a desert wasteland. Turns out there's a huge freaking house, like several stories full of rooms. Yeah. I'm like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Like, this is all here inside the Christian tradition?
Or
I was
even
basement?
within Orthodox Christianity. Yeah.
Hello. Eastern Orthodox Catholicism, I don't know, predates us by over 1,000 years. Maybe we can have some intellectual humility before we say Catholics aren't real Christians. Like, okay. Geez. Yeah. And then you have all the other subsections. You have Black liberation theology. There's queer theology. There's all different types of, then there's the charismatics. There's all different ways of thinking about these things. So for me, it was a lot of emotions because I felt kind of duped by my evangelical tradition, because evangelicalism, broadly speaking, gives you kind of the gatekeepers. Yes. Okay, here's your Francis Chan's. Here's your, John MacArthur's. Here's your, insert charismatic person here. Bill Johnson. I don't know. Yeah, there you go. Here's the people that you're going to learn from. Sure. And you had the whole smorgasbord. Oh, Matt Chandler's a little more reformed than Bill Johnson is. And then back in the day, before things got real crazy, you could even read someone like Shane Claiborne. You're reading, Rob Bell, whoa, Velvet Elvis. Okay, a little edgy. Elvis. Rob's on a few of the stairs here, a little edgy, but it's still in the house. But once you get above ground, you're like, wait, there's entire universes of other ways of being Christian with their own authors and theologians and worldviews of understanding the world. I need time to explore this. And also, how dare you, basement, trick me into thinking that this is all there was? Yeah. When that was not the case. I'm not saying that people who are in different rooms have to say, oh, look, we agree more with the other room. No, I get that. We all have convictions about things. But it wasn't even presented to me as an option. I didn't learn that there are 3 different ways to view hell in the Christian tradition until like 4 years ago. Like, what do you mean universal reconciliation and annihilationism are valid Christian ways of thinking about the afterlife? If you don't believe me, listen to some David Bentley Hart and let him blow your mind for a minute.
Mm.
You know, like my point is that these things are incredibly
Yeah.
malleable. And this is where, just to kind of circle back, I know I'm talking a lot, but since you
No,
asked,
you're great. It's
if you don't
great.
mind,
Please.
this is why I've learned that this word truth is so loaded.
Mm.
Because sometimes you have these evangelical apologists that try and pretend like, you know, the fact that, I don't know, the Eastern Orthodox, the Catholic Church, and the Protestant Church have different Bibles with
Right.
different books in it.
Right.
They don't all agree on even the same Bible.
That's right.
You know, so again, who's right? You would think that if the Bible was some objective standard
Yeah.
that
What does Bible mean? Right.
Right. You would think if the Bible was this objective, clear scientific standard, you'd have a very monolithic Christian tradition. But
Mhm.
the opposite is true,
Yeah.
especially in Protestant circles.
Yeah.
So you know, I think that I've had to learn how to think about the word truth differently. What kind of truth are we talking about here? Because clearly we all have very different opinions on almost everything. Maybe to be a Christian, we have to affirm the physical resurrection. You know, John Dominic Crossan might disagree, but the overall amount of Christians out there would agree with that. I
Sure.
understand that. But
Sure.
when it comes to like everything else, like get in
Right.
line. Right?
Right.
And so again, when you're deconstructing, to bring it back to those people who maybe are new to this,
Yeah.
I understand how overwhelming it can be.
Mhm.
I understand it's like, it can make you nauseous. It can make you anxious. It can make you go, oh my God. Like it's almost like being pulled out of the Matrix for the first time, right?
Yeah.
You're like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize how big things were.
That's
So
right.
you have to give yourself grace and be patient with yourself and
So good, dude.
let your brain catch up to where your heart is. It takes time. Your
Yeah.
brain has been formed over decades, right?
Mhm.
Those neuronic pathways or pathways have
Yeah.
been formed deeply, especially if you grew up in this.
Right.
It takes time for your brain to build some new connections and see things differently. So you can't expect microwave results for things that take a crock pot amount of time, to get a little preachy on us, you know? It takes time to let your brain catch up to your heart. So be gracious with yourself.
That's great, Bishop. That's awesome.
Thank you. Another prophetic word.
Come on, bro. You're about to give us a prophetic word for the new year or something like that.
Oh, dang.
You're going to go speak at Kenneth Copeland's new conference.
Oh, don't you say that.
Please, somebody make a clip of that. That would be incredible. No, I think that's so good. And one of the things I was going to ask you this question. I think I had a unique advantage, and somebody's going to clip this or take this and run with it and say that charismatics don't believe in the Bible. But you know, some of the inside baseball language that we would have for like kind of people in the Reformed camp was that they believed in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Bible. And
right. Yes.
Was the Bible, was that it was never that big of an issue for me. Like when I was wrestling with my doubt or whatever, it was never centered around the scriptures. And even when I was watching like Rhett and Link's video, that's where Rhett was like wrestling. And is that your experience, that you were wrestling with the script? Like, what does the Bible say? Because for me, I remember having a conversation with my my cousin. She super intellectual. She's been a professor. Now she's like a doctor. Her husband is a guy he's from India. He's a astronomer, not an astrologist, astronomer. So he goes to different telescopes and tries to find planets that are inhabitable for life. It's incredible. They're super smart people.
It's unreal. Wow.
Yeah, but they're both agnostic. And she was asking me one day, she's always been really intrigued about our faith, and she would love hearing us speak in tongues. So she'd come to our church to hear us speak in tongues. It's so funny. And she asked me one day a question about this. And I said to her, if one day there was, now somebody's going to take this in, but you have to hear what I'm saying. If somehow they found out that the scriptures were like proven just to be false, I would still believe in God, and I'd still believe in Jesus Christ, because my faith is not based on a book. My faith is based on a person that I have personally met and that I know, and that's Jesus. And maybe the charismatic background kind of lends itself to that, because it is, and it surely goes, it's to our detriment sometimes. The experience, and even my own on this channel, like I press for people to pray for healings and stuff. That was the only thing, and I say this with all honesty, the only thing that kept me in my faith, or kept me at least in the conversation when I was struggling, was that I had seen miracles. I had seen divine healings, not headaches and little tummy aches. I had seen cancer go away. I'd seen a crippled guy's hand extend out. I'd seen that stuff with my own eyes because I prayed for it. My wife was in Africa, saw a lady who had cloudy blind eyes get clear and heal. So like when I'm in the throes of that, like I don't know what the crap's
Mm.
going on, I also was like, I don't know what to do with that either. And
Mm.
so, but was the Bible, is that a hard thing? Was that a hard thing for you of like, so yeah, I don't even know what question I'm asking, but you just take it wherever you want to go.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is interesting, right? Because I was taught, oh, well, the charismatics, they're too feeling based. They don't take the Bible as seriously as we do.
Yeah,
And then I
true
also, though,
sometimes.
for the record, I've met charismatics though who are also quite reformed in a lot of ways when it comes to the Bible, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can see it politically. A lot of these like New Apostolic Reformation types, are like Trump's a new Cyrus. The Bible's clear kind of vibe. So there is that for sure.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think any evangelical who had a similar experience to you or me would say like we were taught that the Bible is like God's standard or like God's
Yeah.
word.
Yeah.
But maybe for you might say, well, the Holy Spirit is what gives us like the ability to engage in
Understand.
the supernatural and for us to hear the voice of God,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, my Reformed tradition was more like, well, yeah, we hear God's voice, but also we hear it mainly through the word. Okay.
Right.
I think, yeah, there was a time when it was definitely like, well, what do I do with this book now, right? Because
Yeah.
listen, it is this weird tension of, I understand for some people when we say, hey, maybe the Bible, isn't what we thought. It goes, well, then how do we know what's true?
Right.
Right? Because one thing that
It's
fundamentalism
good.
gives you, whether it's true or not, is this sense of certainty. It
Sure.
gives you a sense of foundational anchoring of like, well, I believe that things are true because of what this book says, and for example, right? But again, like the problem is when you start actually examining the Bible, you find that a lot of the takes on it don't live up to what it actually says.
That's right.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
one example I use often with people, and again, they might disagree with me, you can, but you probably have heard often, well, the Bible is clear on marriage. No, it's not.
Mm.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I
Genesis
appreciate your take on this. Go for it. Yeah.
Genesis 4, Lamech marries 2 wives. Jacob married his 2 cousins who were sisters, and one of them, and then slept with one of their slaves to get pregnant. And he had 4 wives. And people, I know what they're saying. Well, God never endorsed it. Okay, this is maybe a descriptive text over prescriptive.
Right.
Well, you can go to where Nathaniel is prophesying on behalf of God, shaming David for killing Uriah. And Nathaniel says, again, this is God speaking now. Did I not give you your master's wives to you? Was that not enough for you? So even God says, David, I gave you multiple wives. So again, take it up with God. And then the argument becomes, well, is God the same yesterday, today, or forever, or is he not? So you can wrestle with that on your own. And then Jesus in Matthew says that he reinforces, or he talks about divorce, right, between a man and a woman, and makes a comment about that. And then he says, but being like the eunuchs is greater. And that verse actually led people in the early church to castrate themselves.
That's correct. Yep.
Just saying. And then you have Paul, right, who says it's actually better if you're single, but if you're burning with lust, you should get married. So that's not univocal, friends.
Right.
Now, maybe you want to pull parts of it to make it say certain. Oh, by the way, Genesis 1 just says to the humans, there's no Adam and Eve in Genesis 1, be fruitful and multiply. There's no command for monogamous marriage. It is have sex and make babies. We read into our assumptions of what that means now. I'm not saying that we can't do that.
Sure.
Can't do that. But to make it seem like the Bible is univocal on marriage is crazy. And if I could just blow the audience's mind a little bit deeper, if you want to go one more layer beyond that, there's actually no word in any of the original languages for husband or wife. It's always man or woman. That word gets translated by interpreters. I'm citing the work of Dr. Jennifer Bird here. She's an amazing scholar on this.
Interesting.
I actually have her book, Marriage in the Bible, right here. And her whole point is that even if the Bible was univocal on marriage being between one man and one woman for life, you still would not want a quote-unquote biblical marriage. You know why? Because there's no consent. Biblical marriage is not concerned about consent of a woman. It's concerned about a man who takes, the language is take a woman, the same language that Eve uses when she takes the fruit. It's that ownership. And then a man essentially enters her, which is marking his property, And that's what marriage is, which is why, again, if you read the Jacob story, you will read between, I believe it's Laban and Jacob. There's no Rachel. Rachel has no say in that. It's Jacob goes, I want to work for you. Laban goes, well, we have to give you something. Jacob goes, well, give me one of your daughters. That's the story. You're not going to see, and Rachel was madly in love with Jacob. And that's not the world of the Bible. So again, I'm just making the point, maybe a little bit long-winded.
No, it's fine, yeah.
But I'm making the point that if you use the Bible as this objective truth for quote-unquote morality, and you actually interrogate the text seriously and understand the world of the Bible, you're going to come away with some things that are going to rub up against your modern Western sensibilities. Period.
Yeah, and I want to say this for the person in probably the comments or something they probably already commented, but maybe just wait 1 second here. Wait 1 second. And I think you would agree with this, bro. Like that you can have, if you're like, I disagree with everything Tim said, great, that's fine. I think what we are, at least what I'm pushing for, is a honest view that some things are just a little bit more complicated. They're not so black and white. And I mean, it's the cure for a million evils in spiritual life is just have some humility. And just have
100%.
a little bit of humility. And like, it's so interesting. Like I mentioned Remnant the other day or earlier on this podcast. When they interview all these scholars, like guys who are up on this mountaintop of scholarship, and they ask them about, hey, what's your view on this? What's your view on this? I remember they were asking Craig Keener, hey, what's your view on the end times? And he's like, I haven't really decided yet. I don't really know. And it's like these guys who are up at the tippy top, like they're leading the way in the scholarship. They're okay. They are okay, little pastor of a 45-person church, of saying, I don't know. And so you probably should too. Here's the problem. And I'm going to go ahead and skip one of my points to get to this one.
Wait, can I add on to this really quick? I know. Do you mind? Is that okay?
No, yeah.
I just want to say two things about this. Number one, I totally agree with you. I'm not saying that people have to see it my way. Okay.
Right.
But what I will say is that the reason why we're so passionate about this is because right now in America, there are a group of Christians who hold views that they claim are steeped in the Bible that they now want to enforce on everyone else, especially when it comes to things like gay marriage. Right. Sure. So there's this idea by people like Franklin Graham, the Bible is clear about marriage. It's not. And therefore, if America allows queer people to get married, we're going to fall as a country. That's the problem for me. I don't care if Franklin Graham holds to a view of sexuality that would not include queer people in his church or something. He has a right to do that. It's a free country. Sure. When that, though, then becomes the new standard that queer people who don't give a crap about Franklin Graham now have to submit to and can't get married or can't have the same legal rights as their heterosexual counterparts. Right. That's when I have a problem and say no. So I just want to point that out to the audience. That's the line for me. But the other thing I will say is, Tyler, I've interviewed over the course of several years over 150 scholars at this point. I had to at least. I mean, all over the place. I've interviewed your Russell Moores. I've interviewed your Pete Enns. I've interviewed them all. Mm-hmm. One thing I will say is that that I've noticed a pattern with scholars, period, whether they're more conservative or not apologists, scholars. Right. And it is that they use very open language. Yeah. What they'll say a lot is, hey, according to my research, here's what I found out. Right. Or, hey, yeah, there is a consensus here. Now, consensus does not mean, again, univocal, right?
You're so right.
Hey, I think the text is pretty clear here, but there is some debate on this issue. That's the approach, as opposed to, no, the Bible is clear, and if you don't believe me, you're a heretic, and you definitely can't see it that way. So there's a whole different approach. And these are the people, to your point, who know this stuff better than anyone. They're in the original languages at the places that have the original, have the manuscripts as early as we have them, who are in on it, reading this stuff at the source level. So if they're not always super confident, maybe we should take a step back as lay people on the internet.
So true, bro. Like, I mean, I could sit here probably have an entire hour on that subject, but I do want to say this last one, kind of directing towards the people, because the last couple I had were just directed towards the pastors, and I want to be conscious of your time. We're getting close to an hour here. But the third one for the people was, if you're struggling with deconstruction, I am aware, I've been a pastor for 15 years now in some pastoral form of ministry. I've counseled countless people. I was on the phone this morning counseling someone.
Mm,
Um, the amount of trauma that happens within the church, sexual trauma. I mean,
yes.
I had sexual
Yeah.
trauma. I was molested from a person in my church. And
Oh
so
my
like
goodness. Wow.
I know that it happens a lot. And so whether it's
Yeah.
sexual or abusive or emotional or mental, whatever, um, trauma is in the church and it's real. And I'm sorry. I mean, like in my own stream right now, we're going through the freaking
Oh
hell
yeah.
of Mike Bickle.
Yes, you
And
are. Yes, you are.
I read the Misty Edwards stuff yesterday.
Yep.
And
Yep.
bro, like Misty was like my favorite worship leader growing up. And so just all that
Totally.
stuff, it's just
Totally.
it's so heavy. So here's what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
You have to fix, this is not a great analogy, it probably breaks down on some level, but you fix spiritual problems with spiritual solutions, intellectual problems with intellectual solutions, and emotional problems with emotional solutions. And so if you're like on the downward spiral of skepticism, doubt, anger, whatever, I guess I'm more talking to those people right now who are like doubting and just like um and you're trying to you're watching William Lane Craig and all these people, and you're trying to get answers to your intellectual problems. I want to encourage you that if there's an emotional wound there, intellectual answers are probably not going to solve that. I want to commission you to get counseling. Now, from my tradition, and I'm pretty sure yours too, demonized counseling and psychiatrists and stuff. And so, but my wife and I both see counselors and have seen them for years. Um, get some help. Like,
Yeah.
look at some of those emotional problems and those emotional wounds. And because I've seen this a lot of people who have been emotionally wounded and hurt, and they're losing their faith and they're trying to get intellectual answers, and it's like pouring water into a cup with a hole in it. And maybe deal with those questions are valid and you need to have those questions. Deal with maybe some sort of that trauma. I know it's probably painful, you don't want to deal with it, and you've probably hid it from your heart for years. Kind of going a little more prophetic right now, but like you whoever this is touching right now, I actually feel this is for somebody. Like, please go talk to somebody. It was not your fault, and I know you've been probably made to seem like you're the victim, or you're the reason. You're
Yep.
the victim in this. You are
Yeah.
the victim in this. In whether it was a leader, whoever did that to you, whatever happened. I don't know. I really felt like I was supposed to say that today. So please go talk to somebody, get healing, get your heart whole again. It's possible to be whole too. I think I've my wife and I have both had a lot of trauma in this area as children, and my wife even as an adult. And sometimes you feel like it's not even possible to be whole again. It is
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ loves you. He hasn't forgotten about you. He wants to heal those broken places. And then the questions can come later. But so, do you want to say anything about that before we move on?
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah,
First off,
please.
yeah, if that is you, if you're someone who is abused, especially by a spiritual leader, you are allowed to be angry. You are
Yes.
allowed to have some holy rage, and you are allowed to demand accountability.
Yes. Say something.
You're all 1,000%. You know, people often say, you want a perfect church. No, we want accountable churches. That's the
That's right.
difference. And for the record, and I'm not going to beat you up over Mike Bickle, because I know that's gonna be very painful for you personally when you have heroes of the faith. But that
Sure.
is, of course, not limited just to charismatic places, right? John
Sure.
MacArthur, Mark. There's so many
Oh yeah.
in these spaces, and it's too often. Ravi Zacharias, Brian
Yes.
Houston, etc. And so, yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Like, please see someone who understands religious trauma.
Yeah.
And that might not be a Christian quote unquote counselor. That
Yeah.
might be
That's
a
right.
licensed psychologist who actually can walk you through it. I will tell you from personal experience, I was not abused in my church. I was not sexually abused in my life. But when I was going through my real deep stuff, you know, depression, anxiety,
Yeah.
I did see a Christian counselor. He was helpful, but it was a secular psychologist that got me through it ultimately. He
Mm-hmm.
was the one who gave me actual brain tools that I worked
It's
on
great.
to really get me over the hump of being paralyzed with anxiety
Yeah.
all day. So if that's you, you absolutely have a right. And let me just say too, if you never step foot back into church again, God is big enough, and you're going to be just fine.
Come on,
You're
bro.
going to be just fine. If we believe as
Oh,
Christians that
did I
God
lose you?
created everything, that God is in all and through him we have our being, like Paul says,
Yeah.
then God will find you and meet you beyond the four walls of a building in an organized institutional structure we call evangelical church.
It's great.
So do not feel the pressure that for you to leave the church is to leave Jesus.
Yeah.
Especially when you're in the midst of the real rawness of looking for the healing that you need.
Yeah.
And let me just say, if I might, to the pastors
Please.
out there who are listening,
Yeah.
if you
We're
want to
about to
know why
transition to that
people
anyways.
want nothing to do with your churches, it's because of the lack of accountability in these spaces. Like
1000%.
hard stop. I see this stuff all day long.
Yeah.
And it's not just the big leaders, although those are very painful. There are many micro leaders. And I also want to say to the good pastors out there, because there are
Yeah.
many good pastors,
Yeah.
the system is not designed to support you. I know that. Being a pastor is difficult. It doesn't have to be that way. But
Right.
we place unrealistic expectations on usually men, usually white men, who are supposed to have the perfect sermon, say all the right things, never say the wrong things, always be on,
Yeah.
and have no place to be vulnerable and truthful. And those structures are not healthy. I think that one of the most damaging things we ever did in evangelicalism is borrow from capitalistic corporate America with like this CEO top-down model. That is not how a community functions, like, period. So
that's right.
I really feel for pastors. I don't think all pastors are bad people.
Yeah.
I would hope to see pastors furious at the Mike Bickles and the Brian Houstons and the Mark Driscolls of the world who get away with things that are absolutely abhorrent,
Yeah.
right, for so long with little accountability. I mean, I'm livid. I'm not even a pastor. I hope that we see more holy rage from pastors saying, this is ridiculous and we're not going to tolerate it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So good, bro. And for those pastors who you're like, what is he talking about the model not being, go read a Frank Viola book and you'll educate yourself.
I got that book. It's somewhere. Oh, yeah, I got it right here.
Come on, dude. Come on.
This book changed my life at 18.
You like Frank? Come on.
You know, it's funny, dude. And this is a side note, but whatever. I can go a little bit longer.
Okay.
I read him at 18 on a mission trip. I was in Belgium. Someone gave me his book. And I was like, oh, it's all pagan. It's all pagan. And I will tell you that I really enjoyed Frank's stuff. I revisited the book recently because I'm writing a book for TNE.
Oh, cool.
And I wanted to source some stuff. So I bought the book. I'm reading. I'm like, yeah, a lot of this stuff is still in me. A lot of this stuff, the paid clergy thing, the Sunday best thing, the community center over the event centered. I'm with it, man.
Yeah,
so
that's cool.
Yeah, I like some of Frank's stuff still for sure. Yeah,
that's awesome. Our church is
funny.
Our church is interesting. So we have a Sunday morning expression.
Okay,
but the heart of our church is actually a collection of about 15 or so micro churches, house churches that meet, and that's I oversee those. And I mean, I started getting on that when I read Francis Chan's Letters of the Church, when he left his church and stuff. But then when I read Frank Viola's, what's it called? I don't know. It's somewhere around here. Anyways, he wrote a book. Where is it at? Oh, here it is. Rethinking the Wineskin. And it's a defense of house. It's a very good charismatic name. It's you can't laugh at yourself.
So
then
exactly.
So that book will freaking wreck you, and realize that the model that we've been given in the book of Acts and the Pauline epistles, we're just not following. So I want to speak. This is great. We're transitioning already even our convo to pastors. I want to address, I am a pastor. I'm a full-time pastor at a church. Been in ministry for years now. So I have had backroom, green room convos with people. I myself, when I was going through deconstruction, had convos, so I can see it. I can understand it on every level. And I feel like I have some, lightly say, authority in this. I understand what that person's what the pastor is seeing. So I'll start here. And then I don't want to take too much of your time, bro. We'll just run through these really quickly.
Cool.
It is, stop taking it personal. So many people are lashing out at the people who are deconstructing when they come with conversations, when they come with questions, and the pastors get so frustrated and angry, and it's because you're taking it personal. It's my conviction. I've talked to many people. It's probably because you actually have doubts too and fears, but you have suppressed them. That person is now coming to you. It's doing two things. It's causing you to reawaken some of those same concerns you have, and that makes you frustrated. And then two, it's like there's a whole story behind this, but you are frustrated. You're like probably thinking in your subconscious, I am suppressing these questions. I'm not giving them any ear. You should too. And why are you not doing what I'm doing? Why aren't you being a good Christian to just ignore the bad voices in your head? And I really have a strong feeling that a lot of pastors who get frustrated, get angry, those people, when I talk to them about the preacher of rapture and they stormed out of the room, it's because they have questions too. And they're angry and they're just fearful. And so my plea for a pastor is stop taking it personal. It's not about you. It's not about you. Have some humility. Listen to what the person is saying. Like try to engage with them on an emotional level. Even have a good, I love your term, a good faith conversation. Like maybe assume that they are not, this is the second thing I'll say, and I want to kick it over to you. I think a lot of Christian leaders, when people come with questions, they intrinsically assume that that person has some sort of like sin in their life that they're trying to justify, rather than just, no, I just have I have an honest question. And like you said, hell, like I am 89% annihilationist from my view, and that's very different from when I grew up, was eternal conscious torment.
Yeah, same.
And when I go talk to people, and I have to be careful as a pastor, because I want to be, I want to be careful how I use some of that stuff and talk about it, because I know how much influence it can have, and I want people to make their own decisions. But what I have gotten kickback from is, well, you just don't want people to burn in hell, and you don't like that, so now you're trying to, and I'm like, whoa, why are you importing motive? Why can't I just have, like, this is what I'm reading, this is what I'm just studying, this is what I'm coming away with? And I think a lot of leaders do that, and I think it's because they're fearful. So I'll kick it over to you.
Well, also, if they ask me, if someone told me that, I would say, yes, you're right. I don't want people to burn in hell. I'm not sure why you're so comfortable with that reality, if that's what you believe.
Sure.
Like, I'm just saying, like, if you really believe
right.
that when someone dies, if they did not become a Christian, however you define that they're going to be lit on fire forever in torment and agony.
Yeah.
And you're like, sorry, dude. How could you think differently? It's like
in their mind, I'm willing to pervert, like I'm perverting the text to accomplish that.
Well, and that's how whoever they are, but we'll just say
whatever.
the evangelicals out there. That's how some of these leaders get around.
Sure.
Right? Like they make it emotional, and then they make it seem like emotions are bad, bro. Yeah, I don't want people lit on fire forever. And I do question a God who's like, this is how I get justice. They have to burn forever. I'm sorry, I have questions. I'm a parent. Is God a good father? Because if he is, I would think his standard for love would be higher than mine, not worse. Because I'll tell you right now, if I, in the Calvinist tradition, if I predestined my one son to be abused and tormented by me underneath my wrath with no opportunity to ever change, and my other son I just accepted as who he was no matter what he did, I would not be called a good father by any stretch of the imagination. So yes, I completely, and I'm yelling now, but I completely reject this idea of you're just emotional. I'm sorry for using my human emotions that are made in the Imago Dei for thinking that people being set on fire forever seems kind of harsh. Like, wow, I guess that's crazy town. That being said, to those pastors out there, what I would say is, here's what I would ask of pastors who might have very strong convictions that are not in favor of my convictions. Just be very clear with your boundaries for your parishioners. What makes someone allowed to be in the group? What makes someone not allowed to be in the group? Is it just a matter of right belief? Do I have to believe that eternal conscious torment is the only option? Is there flexibility where I can't believe that and still be part of your church? Having boundaries would help people know if your church is for them or not. Like, one thing that drives me crazy are these churches that will not say, we either are fully inclusive or we're not. I hate this, like, well, we love everyone. Well, what that means, though, is that you're actually not affirming, and what you'll do is you'll accept that queer person until they want to start serving at your church. You'll take their tithe money, no doubt. But when they want to start serving at your church, that's when you say, well, we have boundaries. That is unfair to queer people. That is not healthy. That's not promoting their human flourishing.
You need to make it plain.
I know for a fact, many of my friends who are queer have told me, I just want to know what the church believes so I know if I should waste my time or not. And if they don't believe that I'm accepted by God and I can be a Christian and queer, of course I hate that, but it is what it is. I want to move on. What I don't like being told is some murky, oh, well, your family, God loves everyone. And then when I get all the way invested, when I made all the friendships, when I made all the relationships,
Yep.
then I'm told, sorry, you can't serve on worship team.
Right.
Oh, thanks for your tithe. So
Right.
just be very clear in what you believe, how you define membership, what your roles for what your ethics for volunteering is. Just be very plain Jane about it.
Yeah.
And honestly, that will save pastors a headache too, because when
It's
it comes
true.
time to enforce those boundaries, you could say, look, we made it very clear. When you signed, like my old church, right, they had a policy of we don't want anyone serving on the worship team drinking, and we definitely don't want anything publicly with you and alcohol on your social medias. Now,
Right.
do I think that rule is dumb and stupid? Yes. However, did I agree to it? Yes. I
Mm-hmm.
knew it was one of their rules. I agreed to it. It wasn't hidden. And
Yeah.
so I agreed to play by the stupid rule so I can serve. It was not that big of a deal for me, right?
Yeah.
That'd be very different if there was nothing spelled out and I posted a picture of me and a beer in my hand. They go, whoa, what are you doing? That's not fair to the person that's involved in your organization. So please just be very clear. That's all I ask.
It's good. That's good. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. So often, as pastors, and I've had to have these conversations with that example you gave. Like, our church takes a traditional view of those issues, and we had a person kind of like asking, and I have been in contexts where it's like, just say whatever you can to keep them here. And we can't let them serve, but say whatever you can. And I'm like,
It's crazy.
I have a conviction that I want to be honest with people, and I want to let people have their convictions, and I have mine, and I came to mine, and we're leading the church, whatever. So like, I had a really awkward, hard conversation and full of love and understand. And I tried to say, hey, this is just where I'm at, and this is my convictions, where I feel, and this is what we can, but that person actually, they ended up staying, and they're a great part of our body, and there's a whole story behind that, because I think well, anyways, it's just so much better to be truthful and honest, and instead of like, just, I don't know, trying to pander to the middle.
100%.
But yeah, so just have some balls, I guess. The last thing I'll say, and this is because this is what this is again more geared towards people who are losing their faith, or they're struggling with skepticism and doubt. Pastors, and I had many pastors and leaders tell me this: stop telling people to just have faith. Stop saying there's just some things we just can't know. Like, I understand that, but I was met with that response over and over and over again. And for somebody who feels like they're drowning and they're trying to grab a life, ring or something, that's not helpful. Like,
Yeah.
what I have told people now, because in my church, I have several people who are in the process of deconstructing now, and me sharing my testimony has allowed them to come in vulnerability and openness. I'm like, oh my God, like, I am actually going through this. Or when I see deconstructing, I actually should have said skepticism, doubt. Like, they're wrestling with their faith. And my response is this: I want to answer any questions you have. Like, because my questions were about, why do we believe the Bible if it was essentially assembled 300 years after the church started, and all this, and I was never met with any good answers. And so I say, I want to help answer any questions you have, but even if I don't have the answers, I want to journey through this with you.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, I just want to plead to pastors: stop saying just have faith. Stop saying there's just some things you won't understand, and it's not helpful. It's not
Right.
coming from somebody who went through that road, and it feels like hell on earth. That is not a good answer.
I think a better answer is, hey, here's some of the different ways people answer those questions. You can read this person, you can read that person. Because listen, there are mysteries, right? I mean,
for sure,
if you believe, I'm not sure if I believe this anymore, but if you believe that God is all powerful and all in control, then we have a lot of questions about human suffering. Just saying,
Sure.
like, I know the answers that I've been given. I understand that. But we're allowed to say, like, yeah, that is pretty mysterious, to say the least. But here's some different ways to think about this. And also, maybe I don't have a good answer for you, because I wrestle with that too. The alignment on the acknowledgement of, like, it's a good question, and these things have been wrestled with for thousands of years, I think helps people know that they're not alone, right? Because sometimes in the beginning, you feel like you're the only person who ever thought about this before. chances are you actually aren't. And there have been
Yeah.
people with different answers, very robust answers, by the way,
Yeah.
to those questions. Now, whether you like them or not is up to you and for you to decide. But there definitely are people out there who have thought about these things.
That's great, bro. Hey, bro, thank you so much for coming on. I'm gonna link all y'all stuff down in the description, your YouTube and your Instagram. Is there anything you guys have? I mean, you said you have a book coming up. Is there anything you have coming up that you want to like plug?
Not till next year. No,
Oh, okay, okay.
honestly, nothing really. We have a podcast. We do YouTube stuff. We do TikTok, Instagram. We're kind of everywhere. So you can follow us on any of the channels and say hello and tell me that you came from Tyler's podcast, so I can say, oh, that's so cool, and get your feedback. You can tell me I'm a woke liberal who hates the Bible. I'm totally cool. I'm ready for that. So it's no big deal.
That's awesome. I wish, man, this went longer than I thought. I was hoping to like actually land on talking about Christian nationalism. It's a huge.
We'll be here another hour, bro.
I know. I literally like took about 10 minutes out of one of my sermons recently to talk about the idolatry that the American church, the charismatic church, went with Trump, and that we need to prepare ourselves.
I will tell you this: new PRI data. This is like one of the major research firms. 79% of white Christian nationalists hold charismatic views. You got a problem in the house.
Sorry.
Bro.
We're trying to fix it. Yeah.
I'm not knocking you for it. I'm just, that number honestly shocked me. I wasn't ready for that number because I follow some of the more reformed people your Doug Wilsons and stuff as well.
Yeah.
But when I heard almost 80% of Christian nationalists, adherents, and sympathizers hold to like prophetic prophecy, physical healing, like, that kind of stuff, I was like, wow, that's a big number. So
it's sickening, bro. Like, I mean, oh gosh, this is a whole thing. But like, I was pastoring during 2020. I was at a different church, and I'll say this. This is and we'll end here because I don't keep Tim forever.
Yeah.
It was in 2020. I was pastoring, and one of our people from my church shared this post on Facebook, and so I'm reading it, and it's like, and this is what I shared in my sermon about the idolatry. It says, his hands are strong, his voice is powerful, his hair is whatever, and it goes through this description. I'm like, this is a beautiful
smut book.
His
abs and biceps were bulging. Like,
I'm like, I thought it was like this beautiful picture of Jesus, like some sort of like, I don't know, eyes of fire, hair like wool type picture. And I'm like, wow, this is really interesting, poetic take. I mean, I'm an English major. I love poetry. Take a poetic take on Jesus. And it just happened to be like a movie. I scroll up a little bit, and it was our president, Donald Trump. It was actually after 2020 because it was after he had lost, or whenever that was.
Oh my God.
And I was like, oh, that's what idolatry looks like. Oh, interesting. Dude, and it grieves my heart. It's in our house, and it's not a little fox. It's a big fox in our vineyard. So
listen, man, I'm rooting for you. I know that feeling. I know it can feel embarrassing, but we need people like you on the inside, man, pushing for that change. So keep doing your thing.
Dude, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on. And everybody go check him out. And I'll catch you guys later. Bye.